Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Messy Middle. This is Anita Anello, your host. And today I have with us a new friend, Mike Phillips. We were just, as we always do, I love meeting new people on the podcast. And Mike, you're no exception. We just had a great, already a 30-minute conversation as we
Hi.
were doing our pre-work and warm up for the episode. So thank you so much. Can you introduce yourself to our audience today and just give us some background and some kind of perspective of where you're coming from and what we're going to talk about today?
Absolutely. First off, Anita, thank you for inviting me on the show. And you're right, I really enjoyed our pre-work.
Yeah.
It was just a fantastic conversation. So my background, just to give you an idea of who I am as a young man, I was a USA hockey coach for a number of years, ran a roller skating rink. Fast forward, moved into the auto industry in 2004. So I've been in that industry now for 20 years. Married my wife in 2006, met her. We have three wonderful kids. Ages 23, 17, and 12. So they're all about six years apart. During the course of that journey, I ended up getting ordained as a minister at the request of some friends. It's one of those crazy stories. They were they still are mine and my wife's best friends.
Mm-hmm.
And the bride, she came in and we were all having dinner together one night, and she got down on one knee and she says, "Hey, would you marry Mark and I? Would you marry the two of us?"
Yes.
And I was like, "Oh my God." She says, "You're the only person I know that's really in touch with your faith." And I said, "I got to do it the right way." So I spent time to get into the schooling and do everything that was necessary to get ordained in 2015 to be able to conduct a ceremony properly and marry our two best friends. And the interesting thing, that my journey with faith, I think I really got engaged in 1994. And like anybody, it's been a little bit cyclical. I don't know why I'm going down this path, but it's something that I feel.
Okay.
You said, what's on
Go
your heart?
for
It's
it.
important
Yeah.
to me. We all move to and from God at times. And it was
Mhm.
interesting. I've said with many friends of mine, I said, the way I think about it is if God is really, he's our father, right?
Yeah.
It's just, you can get ticked off at your parents sometimes, but if you come back home, they're still there. They're like, "I got you."
Yeah.
And so that was my experience as a young man. And then again, moving probably past 2006, I've been very deeply rooted in my faith, very connected with my wife, three wonderful kids. The auto industry has been just exceptional for me. I've done sales and management and finance and all of the parts of a dealership. And then during that journey, 15 years ago now, I started my first podcast. I was a broadcasting major briefly in college and started doing podcasting because I was like, hey, this is a way to amplify my voice. And I've got a message inside me and everybody's going to hear it. And Anita, at first, when you start, not everybody hears it.
Yeah.
You want them to. And then, but the thing I realize is if you have at least one person that hears that message, that it's so valuable.
Yeah.
And so that's been an outlet for my soul for many years now. I've had multiple different podcasts, still been in the auto industry, done some leadership education and speaking, management consultation. And so that's sort of me in a nutshell. That's the 2 or 3 minute elevator pitch.
I love that. I'm so excited to hear actually even more elements of your story. So
Sure.
Some of the things that we had talked about when we were just getting warmed up is just I'd love to dig in a little bit deeper to encourage our audience today around podcasting and leadership and sales. And you shared with me earlier, Mike, you have two different YouTube channels, one super successful and has blown up. It's called leadtheteam.tv, if that's correct.
Yeah, it's over time. Right now it's just on YouTube and my name, youtube.com/Mike Phillips. I think I still have leadtheteam.tv attached to it. I've used that for some different channels, but that's the one that's directed. I really do a lot of leadership education. I have a podcast on there similar to yours where I interview a bunch of interesting people from all different facets of industry that are in leadership and management roles to just help share their story and encourage other people that things work out and they work out how they're supposed to. I think one of the things as entrepreneurs, as you're talking about entrepreneurs, one of the things that comes up is we have this illusion of social media, right? Everything is online. You can watch a 3-minute YouTube clip and you take your pick of a successful entrepreneur. To me, I like Gary Vaynerchuk because he's had some influence in marketing on my life. And you can watch one video where it's like he was just a flop and he had 2 people watching and so forth. And 3 minutes later, he's worth $300 million and everything's happening. The time lapse in between that is tremendous, but we don't see all of that growth and all of the blood, sweat, tears, and effort that goes into it because we're just skipping video to video. And that's one of the things I try and bring out a little on my podcast on that leadership and management channel.
I love that. My big two takeaways from that are number
Mm-hmm.
one, showing up in whatever format you want. We're doing podcasting, so we'll talk about
Mm-hmm.
podcasting, but showing up to share your message, and then
Yes.
just the consistency of showing up over and over again. Because everybody, by the way, just in case you're not sure, everybody experiences the same thing, that you start out, you don't feel like you have as much success as you want. You don't feel like anybody's seeing you, anybody's listening to you, anything like that. But the consistency of showing up over and over again. And then we hear a lot. You can see this all over online. It drives me crazy sometimes where somebody says, I was a millionaire overnight, or my YouTube channel blew up to 1 million subscribers. They give this impression that everything happened in an overnight manner. And while I do understand and respect and acknowledge, because it's happened to me, that revenue can take an absolute hockey stick approach in your business. Your YouTube following, your social media following can actually do that. But typically what's happened is because it's years in the making. It's not because just one person said, I showed up on my phone and then everything I said that one time. It doesn't usually, I can't even think of anybody in my mind who it's ever happened that way for, but the consistency of being able to show up and speak the message, the consistency of learning how to share your message in a succinct way. There we go. The consistency of saying, I have a system. Like, I have a system that helps entrepreneurs get 6 and 7 figure months and then days in their business. Oh my gosh, there's a system to be able to do that. I love that. But let's talk a little bit more. Maybe you can dive in deeper. Like, how would you coach somebody and help somebody to say, I wrote down sharing your story. Like, how do you, what if somebody wants to get started? Like, they've been successful in an area of their life and they want to be able to reapply that success in a different manner, a different outlet. Like, how would you help somebody start to identify what their story is and then how to share it?
So the first thing for me, I think it does take a little bit of inner work, a little bit of soul work.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's so many, you hear so many podcasters or YouTubers that say, you just got to turn on the camera and let it happen. And it's okay. Yes, there's something to be said about, you do have to do that at some point. Like, perfection is the enemy of progress.
Yes.
But prior to starting something, when I have a framework, gosh, I wish I had it printed out, because I used it on my own podcast, was sit down and first figure out what's the subject matter that you're
Mm-hmm.
great at. What could you sit and talk about and just fill somebody with knowledge that brings you joy, that you could talk about with no preparation, or that you've experienced expertise in? Because sometimes the thing that brings us joy, I'll caution people on this too, the thing that brings us joy, sometimes you don't want to turn that into a job. Because then you're like, this thing brought me so much joy, but now I'm stressed at trying to build this. So you need to look at a couple of different perspectives. So what brings you joy? What could you talk about? But also, what do you have expertise in? And spend some time writing that down. And if my recommendation, I did this on my own show, write down 20 different possible subjects. Write down 20 different possible ideas or subject matter or shows that you could do or people that you could talk to. And what you'll find is the first 10 come pretty easy. The next 10, you'll get to maybe 15, and then you're like, hey, this guy, I listened to this guy, Mike, told me to write down these 20 things.
Right.
What the heck? I don't even know what the next 5 are.
Yeah.
The irony is, some of those things that you thought came really easy that are going to just take off will not. And the ones that came a little bit later will. But if you have that base, and then the recommendation, I got this from a friend of mine who's a YouTuber. His name is Mike Davenport, Louisville Chevy dude. Shout out to him. He's 500,000 subscribers now.
Nice.
Because I asked him, I said, how do you always come up with so much stuff? Like, you always seem so polished. He goes, notes app on my phone. Anytime I get an idea, I jot it down. He says, that's it.
Yep.
And he says, and then I go back and I go through the stuff. So you start with this base and you get that, get a notes app or get Evernote or something so that you can move your ideas on paper. I'm a believer that the more you take the time to write something down is then how it becomes real. Yeah. Like you're saying, when it becomes a podcast and so forth. So you do that base. And then after that, I think, in my opinion, we're talking about podcasting. One of the things people get hung up on is they're like, I need a really snazzy name and logo.
Yes. Yeah,
right? And then
we're all told that it's not that important, and yet we believe in our minds it's so important that I have the right logo and the right picture and the right name, and
right.
none of that
Well,
really matters.
and it does. You don't want to dive in and then change it, but it also doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where you start striving for this perfection and so forth. And it's okay. We'll get a logo that means something to you, get something that's important, and then come up with a name. And in my experience, the easier it can be,
Mm-hmm.
the better. Like for you, the messy middle. For me, the leadership toolkit. If you ask about what does the podcast mean, if I'm doing a business building entrepreneurial podcast, just call it the business building podcast and then get going.
Yeah.
And then I think that's the next step. Is it is important. Don't worry so much about equipment. At this point, I've acquired equipment, but I've been doing it for 15 years.
Yeah.
But the reality is most people's phones are high quality and just do it. You're using Riverside to broadcast. I use StreamYard. There's many others out there that you can start for free. And know this, it doesn't matter how prepared you are with your ideas, how prepared you are with your logo, how prepared you are with your name, how fashioned you are with your shirt and tie and your perfect microphone and all this stuff. The first time that you go to do that, you will have maybe one person watching.
Yeah. Your
right?
mom.
and so what are you doing? What are you doing to be impactful and share a genuine growth message with that individual? That's who you're talking to. And if it is your mom, can I go down a rabbit hole here for a second,
go.
Anita? I watched a show and it literally brought tears to my eyes. And I wish I could remember the young man's name. I think he's 20 years old, guy on Twitch. And he just hit 5 million subscribers, like 20, 22 years old, young kid.
Yeah.
And his 5 million subscriber, you see it, he's doing it in a short, and you see the number roll over to 5 million, and he like starts bawling.
Oh.
I'll get emotional because we've all been on that journey. And his first thing he says, shout out to my dad, who was my first subscriber, who was the first person that watched. And he says, he's watched me for 10 years to grow to this. And it's, to me, that's impactful because we can all put ourselves in that position. Anybody that says, for me, I think one of my sons was my first subscriber. I give my wife a hard time because I think she was number 1500. You know what I mean? And she's Mike. She goes, I watch you from the other room all the time.
I still time, honey.
but you go through this stuff and you don't realize how much that one viewer is impacted by you and you're impacted by them. And that's the power I think we're all looking for when we have a message to share.
Yeah.
And so just be prepared and it's the same thing in business, Anita, right? It doesn't matter how much good brick and mortar you have, what the good business, what the process is, the product, the knowledge, all the other stuff. When you go open your doors, you're going to be like, whew, all right.
Yeah.
Ready to sell stuff.
Yes.
And if you're lucky, one person's going to show up and it's going to be your dad, your mom, or your spouse. And so it's provide that level of service and maintain your integrity to say, this is the message God has put on my heart. This is what's been given to me. And this is what I'm supposed to share with people. And that's why you need 20 ideas. That's why you need to spend time doing that. Because if it's not something you can be consistent at and sustain, that's the most you're ever going to impact.
Yeah.
And then it's never going to impact and change you either.
Okay. So here's what I love about what that last little segment, Mike, is that you not only gave people like the practical and the tactical, and I love that. Let's give practical and tactical so we can do something with the information. We don't want to just be hearers of the word. We want to be doing something with what you're sharing today. But also what I love is there's such a heavy undercurrent of a servant's heart. Like everything I heard from you was, I want to be able to show up because I want to serve. I want to bring value. I want to be able to. So I'll just add to this. If you're listening right now and you heard everything that Mike said and you started maybe taking notes or mental notes or something like that, and you thought, I'm going to show up because it's all about me and all the stuff that I have to, the value, that the expertise that I have, and talk about me, I would dare say that you possibly will have a different result than if you show up and say, hey, I am really good at the experience that I had and the stories that I have, but I'm going to show up because I'm going to serve somebody else. Because what we're doing here today by sharing our stories and on our podcast is we're going to serve somebody else. we're going to break off something that doesn't belong to them anymore. We're going to talk on this podcast. We're always going to talk about a framework that has to do with God, because that's the framework that I believe in. So somebody's going to get set free as we share that today. We're going to share practical and tactical tips so somebody can move forward in their business, but it's based on a servant's heart. So as you're listening to Mike, like, tune in to how important his words are, his thoughts are, his strategies, his tactics are. It's all has a heavy undercurrent of a man that wants to be able to show up and serve somebody, serve an audience, because this is what God's put on his heart to be able to. And I would imagine that's why you've seen a great deal of success in these different outlets, whether it be your career or your channels or your social media, your digital marketing. It's because what I hear from you is you want to be able to show up and serve well. And I love that. I love that about you. I love that about all of us that are willing to come to the table and say, I'm just going to get on social today because not only do I have these topics that I know, but I'm going to teach. I'm going to bring value. Somebody's life is going to change just in maybe even just the slightest little way because of what I'm sharing today. So just pay attention to that as you guys are listening today, as you're in the audience and you're listening on whatever platform you choose, like that. It also actually starts to be, I don't know if you've noticed this, Mike, but what I've noticed is when I show up and I try to bring value to somebody else, and it's actually less about, I do make the list of topics that I want to talk about. I do make notes everywhere I go. I get brilliant ideas in the shower and I try to write them down or record them on my voice as fast as possible because I forget them all the time. But it also, number one, it adds so much more fun to the delivery of the information when I notice for me when I show up with a servant's heart. But it also creates like a system that's unstoppable. Like I'm always coming with more ideas to serve from a different angle or with a new perspective or something like that, because I'm showing up to serve instead of showing. I can totally get to the end of me in whatever time frame, but if I'm showing up to serve, then I'm always looking for new information to share with my audience, new guests. Absolutely. Because it's, wait a minute, there's more out there. So yeah, well, I love that.
If I can jump in on that, one of the things, and it takes some time, I think, and thank you. That's a huge compliment for me. I appreciate that you can see that.
Yeah.
Because I remember starting my channels, my first show, I think I started in 2009. And it started out was that I was looking for something to feed my soul. Because I had a message to share. And so I was like, oh, hey, getting behind this microphone and I'm able to do this and people can hear my message. And over time, that changed into what is the message I have to share? It's not my message, it's the message that I have to share with others to grow.
Yeah.
And that was the time that I started, that my channels and started growing the most. That's the time that I had the most personal growth in my brick and mortar business. Was because it all of a sudden, and I couldn't tell you the specific, there's not a date.
Yeah.
But I remember I was probably 2 or 3 years in. Actually, there probably is, because I remember there's a gentleman on YouTube that I still follow to this day. He talks about building channels. His name's Nick Nimmin. I don't know if you're familiar with Nick or not, but he's a YouTube trainer. I don't want to say YouTube guru because he's a YouTube trainer, and that's what he does. And I remember he used to give in and of himself. He would do these live shows on Saturday and he would have 15 or 20 people watching. I'll do channel reviews and tell you how you can build. And I was watching him, and I watch, he's almost to 1 million subscribers. I've gotten to know him personally. He'll have 300 to 500 people watching now. This is in the period of about probably 8 or 9 years.
Yeah.
But I remember him reviewing my channel for me and blasting me on stuff. He's like, you're doing stuff that you like instead of stuff that serves others. And I couldn't wrap my head around it. I was like, yeah, of course I have to like it and know it to be able to share it. And he's, yeah, but what does your audience want? Like, you have your own unique experiences that you can put the spin on it. What are the successes? What are the failures? And he's not a leadership or management guy, but I think at that point something clicked. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And I think there are points that I feel like, oh, I had always done that, But then when I really tried to look at it objectively, I hadn't always done that. I was doing more to serve myself than to serve others. And I think that's something as well, whether it's a brick and mortar business, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a social media channel, whether it's a virtual business and so forth. What's that thing you're serving people? Like if you were to think about getting into business, whether you've been a waiter or waitress, okay, I can put myself in this. If I'm going to go be a waiter somewhere, most people go get that waiter job because they think I need to make a living. And if they go out there and they're after only the money and I'm just going to do this thing and I'm going to try and recommend the food that I want and give people the things that I want as the waiter, then your tips aren't very big, right? But when you really start to serve and say, hey, this is what's great or that's what's great, and you become a conversationalist and you're actually legitimately like you are serving, like in the act of actually serving other people. Then all of a sudden it goes from you just trying to have a job to actually making a living and developing a life, because then people become, I remember there's one guy that was so impactful at one of my wife's and my favorite restaurants that like we would go in and that was our waiter. And that's the sort of same, I think that's the analogy of what is it that you're serving? How are you waiting on others with that thing, whatever that fire is that you have, if it's your expertise for managing other people or sales or marketing or building a specific product, or like with you training entrepreneurs to, hey, let me teach you how to do this to that thing, like that. Not only does that light you up, and I can see this from talking to you, but then it spins around and now you're like, okay, well, like when you get the win, that's when I feel the real service. When somebody gets that great meal, that's when the waiters, heck yeah, high five, they're high fiving you and going on. So I think that's something that, I mean, even as talking about it, you can see my energy shift. Like that's exciting to me.
Yes, that's powerful. So if you were gonna, okay, so let's say we talk about sharing a story from a servant's heart. I love that. What if somebody wants to hone the skills of sharing messages? So you have a big area of expertise in I'm just looking at my notes here, keynote speaking and leadership and sales. So what if somebody really wanted to level up their ability to get on stages and to have a more clear message and have it be a message that serves but also draws an audience in either to their channel or to their product or their service or something like that? Like, how do you help somebody transition? That's not the right word. How do you help somebody fine tune the skill set of being a better communicator and moving in the direction of being an excellent communicator?
So there are two things, I think, two or three things. Number one, get really good at asking questions. So either asking questions of the audience, asking the questions of the person that hired you. If you're moving into sales, asking questions directly of the client, and then believe them when they tell you the answers.
Oh, good.
Because what happens is I think we'll ask a question of somebody, hey, what do you want me to speak on this? And they'll tell you, but then we still want to tailor this communication or this keynote speech or the sale to them based on our model of the world. Here's my blinders, here's my vision. And the reality is you have to be you have to be able to communicate in a way that they want to communicate. And so one of the things that I would recommend for people too, so number one is ask questions and believe people when they tell you the answers. Number two, and this is something that served me very well, is study communication some. Whether you want to like actually take the time to study communication. One of the things that I studied a lot was NLP, linguistics, neuro-linguistic programming. And one of the things that I found, and I'll give this framework real quick on your show, is knowing that people have a specific modality that they prefer to communicate in. And they also, and we move through all of them, right? People can be primary visual, primarily auditory, or primarily kinesthetic, which means, okay, I view my model of the world through pictures. I view my model of the world through having conversations with myself or hearing how it interacts with me. Or I just do that gut check. I need to know how it feels. Does this feel right? And again, as I'm saying those things, like we've all experienced all of those different modalities in our lives. If somebody's listening to the podcast that we're doing right now, they're functioning in an auditory mode, right? Versus if they're watching us later on YouTube or whatnot. And so something to be aware of when you're asking questions, they're giving you the answers, is take note of those responses. When I'm saying spend some time, I'm not saying you got to become an expert, but pick up a book on communication, pick up a book on the psychology of communication. Like I said, look up NLP. I don't have a specific one. One of the ones that I read, and it's years ago, I don't even know if it's in print anymore, is called Frogs into Princes by Richard Bandler and John Grinder.
Yeah.
It's a psychology book, and it's a really hard, dry read. So I don't necessarily, like, if you wanted to get into that, like you're saying, oh, great, you're telling us a book you don't recommend, but
don't start with that one.
Don't start with that one. It was a good base. But if you look that up and you study communication, at least for 30 days, invest some time in yourself to grow in the communication world. So, as I'm talking to somebody, if they say, oh yeah, I can see what you're saying, they're probably in a visual mode because they can see what you're saying, even though we're saying words and so forth. Right. And so you start to tailor, when you're talking about communicating with people, you start to tailor when I'm asking those questions based on their response. You can get in alignment with them by using similar language. And so I think that's something that's valuable. Yeah. The third thing I would say, if you want to level up like your presence on stage, then be deliberate about making eye contact across the room. And that can seem really simple, but one of the ways that I trained on it, my oldest son, who's 23 years old, I remember him he was super uncomfortable. He had to give a speech at school, as many kids are uncomfortable giving a speech at school. Yeah. He says, Dad, you do this speaking thing. He says, I don't know what to do. He goes, I lock up, I freeze. And I gave the same advice to my middle son. I said, here's what you do. If you're in an auditorium of 300 kids, how many of those kids do you know? I don't know. Dozen of them, 12, 15, probably some of them. I said, good. Pick those kids out and make eye contact with them. And when you're sharing the message, I'm talking directly to that individual, because as you're moving around the room and you're making eye contact, then all of a sudden it feels like you're making eye contact with everyone, and it brings them in. It makes them feel a part of the conversation. So that's something else that I think is leveling up when you're talking about presence and charisma. Nice. And then I would say those things. And then the last is certainly when people give you answers, going back to the first one, if you're asking questions and they give you an answer and, hey, we want you to speak about this, or we want you to teach on this or train on this, or here's the product we need. There's no replacement for genuine caring. There's just not. Yeah. And so you have to, if you want to, you ask yourself, how do I really serve this audience? If this is the message that's coming, how can I do it in my framework and be able to present this in a way that will help grow other people and will really serve the people that it's meant to serve? And one of the ways that I've found to do that is you need a couple of trusted advisors. Maybe it's your spouse at the beginning. Maybe it's Anita, if Anita's in my circle, and I say, hey, listen, can I run this by you for 30 minutes? I want to read you my framework or my idea and so forth, and ask the question deliberately, like shoot holes in it. What am I missing? Nice. But I think you need people that you really can trust that will give you genuine feedback on that without their own agenda in mind. So they don't need to be in the same industry. Yeah. They just need to be people that will give you very honest feedback. I think that's something. And now, granted, when I've done that, like I still use my wife as a sounding board because she's very direct with me. And so it's like when I was learning to sell cars, I'll give you an example. I was learning to sell cars back in 2004, and I was trying to learn what the process is. Okay, there's these 5 steps to the process, and then I got to ask this and I got to do that, and so on and so forth. I practiced running those scripts and the process and stuff on her over and over. Like we would sit on the couch, be eating Chinese food. And I'm like, what if I asked you this? And what if I did that? The thing I realized is 6 months later, when we needed to buy a car, I could not sell her a car because she knew what was coming, but it allowed me to get good at the delivery of that without fear of somebody on the other side judging me.
I love that. A lot of what I'm hearing from what you're talking about, Mike, is, how do I want to say, become a student.
Oh, 100%.
Right? It's the student mentality that says, I tell my kids all the time that we're always students. We always have the opportunity to learn something new. And then with humility, being able to go to your trusted friends, your partner, whoever that looks like. Sometimes that could be a spouse, maybe not. It just depends
Right.
on
No,
what they're
absolutely. Can I share
yeah.
something on this? When
Yes,
we're
go.
talking about our trusted friends, here's the thing you need to realize too, is not everybody is right for that role of giving you.
That's what
So
yeah.
when you're like, my spouse may be very brutally honest with me,
Yeah.
but she may not be the right one for the speech all the time. You need somebody that's an advisor when you're going to them to say, hey, are you going to ask the same person to give you feedback on your keynote speech as you're going to ask for the person when you're building a business and you need accounting advice? So
Yeah.
you need different people in the circle to be able to go to. And you summed it up perfectly, Anita. Like, you have to have a student's heart. You have to remain teachable.
Yeah.
The moment you think you know everything, I'll tell you this, and I can't remember, this is probably 2012. I think I wrote a blog that talks about being the champion versus the challenger. There's two very different mentalities,
Yeah.
right? A champion's mentality versus a challenger's mentality. And the champion's mentality is here, hey, I've made it. And the challenger's mentality is still learning, bobbing, weaving, trying to climb to the top, pushing, grinding. You have to have grit. And when you become a champion, when you start really succeeding and you start reaping the rewards of your hard work, then you have to find new ways to stay the challenger. Because if you've succeeded, one of the things you have to look at is, okay, I'm climbing this mountain and I've succeeded at this one thing. There's still another mountain to climb across the way. You can't, once you've succeeded at something, I love this one. Like, once you've given your best, it's not your best anymore.
Oh yeah.
Right? You have
Yeah.
something new to climb
you gotta keep leveling up. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to keep going.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad you actually defined the champion and the challenger, because my mind was going in a different direction altogether. So that's super helpful the way that you laid that out. I was
Thanks.
thinking the champion is like the person, like, I'm cheerleading you, and the challenger is somebody who's a little bit more like ornery in their feedback. I would probably add to that a little bit and say, or just what I've experienced is that when I'm creating new offers, when I'm looking at areas in my business, like, sometimes my husband is not always the best person to give me feedback on that. Not because he's not already experienced in his own industry. It has nothing to do with him, but he's not my sweet spot audience. And so sometimes what I've found is, and I will circle back to what you said earlier, is you find those trusted people that can give you valid feedback based on the industry that you're in, the offer that you're doing, the perspective that you have, those kinds of things. I think for me, the best way that I've done that is I've invested in a big manner in coaching, so that I get coached by somebody else that can give me the valid. So it's an investment in me, and it's an investment in my coach, so that they can give me the feedback that says, like you had with the YouTube guy, Nick, where it said, hey, you're missing the mark over here. Like, we need that. And I think especially as entrepreneurs, there's an employee mindset and then there's an entrepreneur mindset. Those aren't always the same thing, and they're usually not found in the same person. I love, Mike, that you actually have the ability to have both of those hats on really well, but that's not typical, right? It's usually one or the other. And we want to get around people that understand what we're driving for and towards, so that they can give us some good, valid market research and feedback so that we can improve.
Well, one thing, and I don't want people to overlook this. One thing we overlook in our business, like when we're talking about feedback.
Yeah.
Oh, and I would say this for anybody. It does not matter what business you're in. It doesn't matter if you're a grocery store or a YouTube person or whatnot. Yeah. The one person we often overlook is our existing customer. That person you've already sold the thing to.
Yeah.
Go back to them and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this thing. What do you think? And so easily, because we already know that's our market audience, right? We already know those are our people. We already know that they're going to champion our cause. We already know that they like us and trust us and will do business with us because they have. But for some reason, I think it's easy to lose touch with that. We go, I already sold them this thing, and we're on down the next path. We're looking past it to try and do what's the next big thing, instead of just stopping and saying, hey, you 5 people bought my existing product. Here's what I'm thinking about for something else. How would that affect you? If all 5 of them are like, that's awesome, do it. I'd buy one right now. versus if they come and go, that's stupid, I wouldn't do that. Are you serving the right audience then?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love the fact that there's a difference between somebody who's raised their hand in the form of putting their credit card in and buying something from us versus followers that are on channels and stuff. Because I might have followers on all my social media, but that doesn't necessarily, and they might be consuming my content. They might not be ready to purchase, whatever they are, wherever they are in their buying cycle. That's totally fine. But being able, I love what you said, being able to pay attention to the customers that have already invested in themselves and invested in me by being able to raise their hand in the form of their dollars that said,
Yep.
not only do I consume your information, Anita, but I also love it so much that I want all of it. What else do you have that I can buy? Because they've shifted from like a follower to a fan and then maybe a raving fan, depending on where you are in that spectrum. Who's the guy that talks about raving fans? Is that Seth Godin, maybe? There's a book.
I think Seth Godin has said it, and I
1,000 raving fans. Yeah.
And there's one talking about, oh my gosh, it's a marketing book from like 2004 that talks about primal branding.
Oh,
have you ever read Primal Branding?
I haven't done that one. Yeah.
That is a book I would recommend because and I cannot think of the author's name, but Primal Branding, I read that, and it's definitely one too that talks about how are you going to market your product? How are you going to find your tribe? Where are you going to find your people?
Yeah.
And how are you going to connect with them? And he talks a lot about how are you going to build raving fans.
Nice. Okay. So actually that makes me think of something else that I want to talk about a little bit with you and get your perspective. So I know a lot of folks that are earlier in the entrepreneur journey, they will say things like discredit themselves. I don't have 12,000 followers. I don't have 1 million followers. I can't dance on TikTok or whatever their thing is. But let's talk about like how many people that you actually need to have in your audience to make an impact. Because I know from my experience, I don't have to actually have a gigantic following. That number can be different for everybody to be able to have a successful business. I can actually have, and this goes back to what we just discussed, is the raving fan is the one that I'll buy from you every single time you show up and show me a new offer because I love you so much so that Mike Phillips is my guy. Every time he throws something out there, I'm going to go ahead and get it. Right.
Sure. And I think realistically, I think the number varies. I don't think you can give just a canned response. And I've read many books on it and I've done it. You've done it. That I think realistically, and I think it depends on your product. If you're doing high ticket coaching, maybe you need 10 or 20 people that are willing to support you in the way of dollars, not in the way of likes. You can't take likes out of the ATM. And so I know that can seem harsh, but that's a fact. When you're a business owner, it's like, oh, I got all these people that follow and like me, and it's okay. High ticket could be 10 or 20 people. I think realistically, you probably need to figure out how can you establish a base of roughly 100 people, an audience of 100 people that you can actually serve and exchange dollars for goods or services.
Nice.
Maybe up to 1,000, somewhere between that 10 and 1,000 mark, I think is reasonable because people go, I don't have this or I don't have that. Start building your list. You start looking at the people on Facebook. You start emailing them. You start communicating with them one-on-one. Nice. The reality is if I'm going to start a business selling, and I know everyone uses this as an example, but say we're going to start a business selling widgets. Yeah. Right. Take the time to write down or put in a list somehow. Who are 100 people that I could call that these widgets would serve? And then you ask yourself, how long would it, I'll ask you, Anita, how long would it take you to make contact with 100 people to do business with?
Oh gosh, I could do it in less than a week. Or if I'm really slow or I'm not big on my confidence, maybe a week.
So somewhere between, I would say, and I've worked in call center environments, so somewhere between a day and a week, you can make contact with 100 people. Right. To make contact with 100 people, you probably got to call 500, right? So there's your week and so on and so forth. And there are some tactical pieces that go into it. But I think especially you look and you go, oh, Jimmy Donaldson, Mr. Beast, he's got 30 million followers and he's got all this. He's being sustained by ad revenue and a whole different thing. He's not selling somebody one-on-one.
Right. He's also been at it a long time.
So ironically, but he's consistent. So I've met him. I met him in 2018 initially at Vid Summit. I think he was 20, or excuse me, he was like 21 at the time. Young kid, super just brilliant.
Yeah.
Most people are familiar with Mr. Beast, and whether you're a fan of his content or not, people know who he is. Like, they know the name. And the interesting thing is, if you look back at his stuff, I think when he was 13 or 14 years old, he recorded a video that says, "Hey, this is to myself in 10 years." And he's just keep going, this and that. And then if you look at his growth and so forth, he went from what's those 100 people to do business with to now it's it morphs, because for him as an individual, it was, okay, how do you go from serving these individual 100 or 1,000 people to how do I have this whole base, and how do I scale the business? Like, you start to ask different questions as you grow. But I think initially it's really find 100 people that you can really serve and sell a product to. And then you can go up or down from there. Again, depending on the ticket of the item. If you're coaching somebody and you say, "Hey, I'm worth it and I charge $10,000 to coach a client for 30 days, then maybe you don't need 100 people, right? Yeah. You need 2 solid people that you can really invest in and that will sing your praises of what a good job that you do. And then you pour everything into them to start.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. Okay. Any last thoughts as we're getting ready to wrap up here a little bit? Oh, I have a question for you.
Yes. Shoot.
What do you do with the question that says, "I have all of these interests, Anita, Mike, what if I want to change? I can't commit myself to just talk about one thing. I'm interested," or I actually ran into a lady recently. "I'm good at everything." I was kind of like, whoa, okay. So how do you help somebody to still make a decision to start when they say, so we talked about the person that might think, "Oh, I don't know what to talk about." Now let's go to the opposite of the spectrum and talk about
I got all these things.
Person that says, "I'm good at everything. I can talk about everything." Okay. So how do we help them decide?
First off, you need to pick one. I'll give you a couple of these. May seem cliche, but the things, if you've been in business any length of time, they're only cliche until they're not.
Yes.
And the thing is, here's a couple of things. One, the cliche is you can't serve 2 masters. So if you're trying to split your brain and serve multiple things, and not to say that the audience is your master, but you're trying to split your brain like that, you won't be success. It'll be really hard to achieve success because you're splitting an audience. Secondly, we've all heard it say, right, when you try and serve everyone, you serve no one.
That's right.
And so let's take those same 100 people and you say, "I'm good at everything. I can teach leadership, management, sales, marketing, communication. Like, I know all those things."
Yes.
So I'll use myself as an example, not as an ego statement, just saying, okay, I know all those things. The person that subscribes to me or my product to learn more about communication doesn't care about these 4 other things. So I'm only talking to that one person. So out of 100 people, I'm going to, make connection with 10 or 20. You're going to see much, much slower growth in any business, social media especially, if you're trying to say, then it's even worse when we go, and we'll use a podcast as an example. "I'm going to set up and do a variety podcast." Okay, guess what? I hate to break it to you, but no one cares. Okay. If you're doing a variety podcast and you're going to talk to 100 different people, you're going to have 100 different subjects, you're going to connect with one of them on each episode, and your podcast is never going to grow.
Yeah.
That's so when you're saying, what do I do to make this person, or how do I help this person decide? At the root of the word decision is deci, which is Latin for to cut off.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're going to make a decision, it means you cut off any other possibilities. So you need to make that decision. You have to cut off any other possibility of, here's this thing that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to have to be consistent. Now, that's not to mean maybe I start and I say, okay, as Mike Phillips, I'm going to talk about leadership, and that's my thing. Or years ago, I'll give you an example, myself included, right? When my first podcast from 2009 to 2011 was all about sales motivation. How do I motivate myself as a salesperson? How do I grow myself as a salesperson? Where can I find new clients? Where can I do that?
Yeah.
Fast forward, as I grew, as my audience grew, and I grew, and the podcast grew, well, that would then turned into, let me teach the people that have moved past sales and become leaders.
Yes.
And so is it okay to change subjects? 100% absolutely. But then you decide to make the move and go. If you're good at 100 things, pick one, maybe 2, and do your product, business, service, podcast around those one or two things.
Yeah.
If you're going to change, I would make it very definitive and tell people that, hey, this show, we've served people doing this thing, and a lot of our clients have really seen rapid and tremendous growth, and they've moved to this level up the mountain. And what we needed at base camp is no longer what we need to get to the top of the mountain. Here's where the podcast is going, or here's where the business is going, or whatnot. And not to say that you need to change, but for me, that's been more of a personal growth journey. And I think I had to applying it to myself. And that's, speaking frankly with you, like that's one reason I started this higher level leadership podcast, the Leadership Toolkit, last year for myself, not for myself, for other people. But I've seen larger growth in that because it was past the point of the other things that I was doing.
Yeah.
And,
so did you start a whole new channel?
I put it on my primarily leadership channel, but yeah, the Leadership Toolkit has all of its own verticals. It has its own playlist. It has its own space on Spotify. It's all of its own stuff. Yeah. It's still included on my Mike Phillips channel just because it's still on that channel's all been leadership education. Yeah. Lead the team. So that I have not started. I still have some of the older things on that channel, but some of those channels I've either taken off or they're not closed. I still have the content out there, but that's just not where I'm at. It wouldn't be fair to try and go back and say, it'd be like Gary Vaynerchuk he goes back every once in a while to be nostalgic and does Wine Library. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
I've heard that. Yeah.
He started with Wine Library, but now he's doing all this big marketing stuff, and people will watch him for one show to do Wine Library because it's nostalgic, it's fun. He's going back to his roots. But if he was going to do that full time and talk about, oh, hey, here, let me tell you what wine pairs with Captain Crunch and so forth, people would be like, dude, this isn't what I subscribe to you for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's awesome. Gary V.
Yeah.
That's so fun. My gosh, I just want to honor you today. You have done such an amazing job of just showing up and serving and just giving so generously. The content that you've shared today and not just the steps, but the structure and the mindset. Like we've worked on head and heart and business tactics. We've done it all today. So I just want to honor you and the way that you show up when you show up as a guest. Like,
thank you.
It's just been amazing. So thank you so much for serving today.
100%. And I want one or two other things, because you asked me, hey, any final thoughts? Oh, yes. For anybody that's listening or watching this, here's something that I will tell you, because we always ask, like you've heard the question, Anita, if you could go back 20 years and tell your teenage self, what would you do differently? And so let me give anybody that's listening, whether it's your teenage self right now, if you are a young entrepreneur starting out, or 20s or 30s, or 50s or 60s, and you're starting a whole new life as an entrepreneur, whatever that thing is, whatever it is that lights you up and feeds your soul, do that. Do not wait, because we've all done it. Like we get trapped in that, I got to do this to make a living. And while you're making a living, literally you forget to make a life. Like you get tied up and you're slave to the clock, so to speak. And meanwhile, you have this fire burning in you. You have a message, you have something you're supposed to be doing. And I would say now more than ever, do some of that. If you work a 9 to 5 and then come home and invest with your family from 5 to 7, and I'm not saying grind yourself out, but invest with your family, have dinner, do the things that matter, because those are the people, that's why you're working. Spend from 5 to 7 or 5 to 8, but then invest some time to grow yourself and grow that thing. Do it 8 to 10 at night. Yeah. Find the time
during your Netflix time.
Yeah. It's Tony Robbins calls it net time. NET time, right? No extra time while I have no extra time, but this is when I'm going to do it, because that's the reality. Like you can be spending 2 hours or 3 hours binging Netflix. You're going to be up till 10 or 11 o'clock anyway. Right. Do it on something that lights you up, because if it lights you up, it lights other people up too. Yeah. And so that would be something I would suggest. And then Anita, thank you so much for having me on the show. Like it's been just an absolutely fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed it. You're a great host, and I just love to connect with you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here with us today. Hey, how can people reach out to you? How can they connect with you? We'll make sure and put some links in the show notes, but just go ahead and give a shout out for how people can connect with you.
Sure. So I'll give you 2 YouTube channels and an email address. My YouTube channel, if you go to youtube.com/Mike Phillips, I have all my leadership and management and sales training. It's primarily leadership and management, but if you dig deep enough, there's some old school sales training on there. Not old school, it's genuine from the heart. If you go to youtube.com/faith and fire, that's
Nice.
a devotional channel that I share one Bible topic each week, basically. I have people subscribing and listening there, and it's just, hey, how can this affect you positively for the day? And then off we go. They're 5 or 10 minute Bible conversations. And then my email address, if you want to reach out, is just mike@leadtheteam.net. It's LEADTHETEAM.net.
Nice. Thank you so much for being with us today. I so appreciate you in just so many new ways.
Thank you.
All right.